Hello everyone, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. In today's video, we are going to be talking about two of the most mysterious disappearances that have ever occurred in British Columbia, Canada. They both occurred within a couple of days of each other in November of 2019. On November 17th of 2019, Marshall Iwasa, a 26-year-old college student, had returned to Lethbridge to see his mother, as well as talk about helping her with her computer, and to have some coffee and talk about his business. He was then planning on heading right back up to Calgary, where the new semester of college was about to start. Little to his family and mother's knowledge, he had not enrolled in classes and had not been enrolled in any classes for some time. That night, after visiting with his mother, they said their goodbyes, and Marshall told her that he was going to first stop at his storage facility, which was located really close by in the industrial park, then head back up to Calgary. Marshall has never been seen since. It wasn't until 6 days later when a group of hikers that were out in British Columbia that were making their way to what is known as the Waddington hut. Here is a picture of that hut. It is located in a very desolate area. It's maintained by a group of outdoors people. There is a reservation system. You have to make reservations ahead of time. It's a beautiful hut. It can hold up to 25 people. It is off this trail called the Phelix Creek Trail. Before you get to the trail, though, you have to go down this forest logging route, which then eventually comes to an end. Then the trail begins. They had just gotten to the end of this logging route where they parked their vehicle. They came upon something that was absolutely shocking to them. Upon reaching their destination, they found a pickup truck that was completely burnt out. This is part of one of the hikers' original Facebook posts. Quote, "We had a crazy experience this weekend trying to get to the Waddington hut. We took the 4x4 trail all the way to the trailhead, and when we arrived, we stumbled onto quite the scene. There was a burnt out pickup truck that smelled very fresh. In addition, there were possessions of all kinds thrown all over the place, including 2 passports, 3 smashed cell phones, and a smashed laptop. Also, there were ID cards, toiletry bags, clothing. To us, it felt like a crime scene and had a very, very bad feeling about it. So we immediately turned around and left because we thought that the perpetrators might still be in the area. We left and immediately contacted the authorities. Before doing so, the hikers were very smart and took a lot of different pictures from various different angles, which they made copies of and turned over to the RCMP. This truck was identified as Marshall Iwasa's, almost 14 hours away from where he was in Lethbridge, raising the question, how did he get out there? Why did he go out there? Did he go out there on his own accord? Marshall had no known acquaintances in that area. They also noticed that not only was the truck completely burnt out, the steering column had been removed and was missing. Plus, Marshall was nowhere to be found. The authorities were wondering what happened to him. Did he just hike off? Was he assaulted? What happened? This investigation was headed up by the Whistler Department of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They immediately noticed that whoever did this had purposely driven the car to the very end of the logging trail to the point where it could no longer be driven into the forest, and this is where it was set ablaze. The time between the hikers finding the burnt out vehicle and the authorities getting to the scene was 2 days. Sometime in between this time period, the authorities determined that based on the photos that the hikers took and the photos that the authorities took when they got there, these are all pictures from in and around the scene, they noticed that many of the items had been moved. This indicated to everyone involved, the authorities, the friends, the family, that someone had come and tampered with that crime scene. They also determined that while most of the items did belong to Marshall, several of the items did not, and we're going to talk about that more here in a little bit. Here are some pictures just to show you the items that are circled are the pictures that the hikers took. Then later there are pictures that the investigators took. I want to point out this red cooler. This is a picture when the hikers first came on scene. You can see it's lying there flat next to a bunch of the other items. Then the investigators' pictures show the cooler up several feet away and it's in a totally different position. Just keep this in mind. We'll come back to it in a little bit. During their investigation, the authorities realized that Marshall had never made it back to Calgary. However, they were able to determine that he had made it to his storage facility located in the Lethbridge Industrial Park. They also determined that after leaving his mother's house, he apparently spent the whole night at this storage facility trying to gain access. Unfortunately, at the time, the facility was closed, so even though he had the right keypad number, it kept refusing him entry until later in the morning. When the facility reopened, he was finally able to gain entrance into his facility, which he then spent roughly 4 to 5 hours in. Unfortunately, by the time the investigators had got there, the CCTV footage had been deleted, but they did have the memory info from the keypad, which gave them his time frames. We would then later learn from family members that Marshall had been working on a new computer game. He had spent close to 1,000 hours on this game, and his reasoning for going to the storage facility was that he had not been there since August of 2019, and he really needs some parts from various computers that were in that storage facility. They determined that he left the storage facility on November 18th, 2019 at 8:24 a.m. After that, his financial trail went cold. There was no more CCTV footage, anything that tracked his whereabouts. So they still had no idea how he ended up 14 hours away and whether he did this on his own volition or if he was coerced. There are many questions as to how the investigators found the scene. If the perpetrators were meaning to burn everything, why were all of his possessions taken out of the bed of the truck and just scattered everywhere? Also, we know that a Mountain Hardwear 30-liter backpack was missing, one of his good cell phones was missing, a laptop Toshiba was missing, and various other small items. The investigators also then noticed that there was a small trail leading away from the burnt truck down to the stream, which looked like a person had been running and shedding burning clothes. They sent divers to investigate the deeper parts of the stream, which they came up with nothing. And at this point, the RCMP made this statement.
We believe that he was likely the driver. There's some personal effects around in the area, but there's nothing to suggest that there was anything suspicious that occurred.
It was at this point that the RCMP stopped investigating the case. I could not believe when I read this. Remind you, they had found a burnt out vehicle. Arson is arson. It's always a criminal act, no matter who they believed might have done it. Then they found this suspicious trail of someone running with probably burning clothes down to the river. They also noticed that the steering column had been removed. This is usually done when the perpetrators are being extra careful because they are worried about DNA evidence. There are so many suspicious things about this case. It's just unbelievable that the RCMP would make such a statement. The fact that they literally said that they believed Marshall had done this himself and then just walked off into the woods is just absolutely ridiculous to me. As you can imagine, his family and friends were also outraged. The investigation was turned over to the Lethbridge Police Department. This didn't really help much. The Lethbridge Police Department had him classified as a suspicious missing person. The investigation now was really being headed by his family and friends. The family took to social media. They looked for various leads that way, and they did. They found a lot of different people talking about it on Facebook. Unbelievably, the fire investigation of the vehicle was not done until 9 months after the vehicle was located. The Lethbridge Police Department said, quote, "It is suspicious, but we don't believe there was any criminal act involved." This is such a contradictory statement because not only had the RCMP originally said there was nothing suspicious, now you have the Lethbridge Police Department saying, yes, there is something suspicious, but we don't believe any criminal act took place. Keep in mind that arson in any form is an act of crime. So there had been an act of crime. It just seems that the police either knew more than they were saying or that they were trying to cover something up. They were also keeping a lot of information from the family, saying that this is an active, ongoing investigation and we don't want to release too much information that could possibly obscure the current ongoing investigation. Well, that to me says that they did believe that it was some kind of a criminal investigation. Otherwise, why would there be this cat and mouse game going back and forth with the family? So many things in this case made no sense. Also, who was it that tampered with the evidence? All the authorities agreed that the evidence had been moved. They checked with the Brian Waddington hut reservation system. No other people had reserved the hut at that time. No other people were supposed to be in and around that area. And as many people have said, the area around this hut is very desolate. It's a perfect way to get away, quote, from anyone and be by yourself. So it's very plausible that whoever committed this crime knew that and picked this place on purpose. It is also noteworthy to say that when the authorities finally did the fire investigation, the family had hired their own private investigator that not only proved that it was arson, the private investigator found the lighter in that area that he believed was responsible for starting the actual fire. Despite him turning this information over to the Lethbridge Police Department, they still refused to classify it as a criminal case. Sadly, because of this, they were never able to do the forensic and other analysis that they should have done to determine what actually happened to Marshall. Both the Lethbridge Police and the RCMP believed that because he had not told his family about not re-registering for college classes, they are quoted in saying that they believed he was just suffering from a lack of direction and most likely did this himself and then just wandered off to start a new life. The idea that Marshall did this by himself is just absolutely absurd. This case has foul play written all over it. The fact that the truck was burnt out, the steering column was removed, all the items were taken out prior, leading me to believe that someone was looking for something specific. Why else not just torch them with the rest of the vehicle? Why remove the steering column if you weren't trying to hide evidence? If Marshall had done that himself or was trying to get away, why would he do that? Why would he care if they found evidence of DNA on his truck? It was his truck. The authorities failed to treat this as a crime scene, and therefore they actually just left the truck out there. Up until recently in this year, that burnt out truck was out there the entire time until a private citizen went out and removed it himself. I'll have a link to that interview and his reasonings. I personally don't agree with that decision because it is an open investigation. He failed to check with both the family or authorities. His reason being that he said that it had become an environmental concern, which I can kind of understand. But again, being that it's an open, active investigation, I still think he should have checked with both the family and the authorities. Sadly, Marshall Iwasa has not been heard of or seen since 2019, and his case is still an active, open missing persons case. I will be discussing theories after we discuss the next missing person who went missing a few hours after Marshall was reported missing on November 25th of 2019 in the Squamish area. At the time of his disappearance, Daniel Riok was 29 years old, living in the Squamish area. He was working odd jobs as a construction worker. Despite being last seen on November 25th of 2019, Daniel Riok was not actually reported missing until January 7th of 2020. At roughly 10 a.m. on November 25th of 2019, Daniel Riok was reported on the Chiakai Ranch. He was reportedly walking around doing some very odd things. This is a map of where the actual ranch is in Upper Squamish. People first noticed that Daniel was not in any way dressed for the weather. One of the ranchers then said that he saw Daniel walking down the street with his shirt pulled over his head. The temperatures were well below freezing, so the rancher immediately thought that there was something wrong. At this point, Daniel approached the rancher and kindly asked if he could use his cell phone to make a quick call. The rancher obliged. Then Daniel contacted his uncle. His uncle asked him what was going on. Daniel responded that he was living his life in another time frame. This all, of course, sounded very confusing to his uncle and the rancher. It was at this point that the rancher took the cell phone back from Daniel. He alerted his uncle that the RCMP were there now on the property. Apparently, other people that were concerned about Daniel had called the RCMP. They took him into custody based solely on his peculiar behavior, but then later that evening at around 5:30 p.m., they released him. After being released, Daniel Riok was caught on surveillance camera at a nearby Tim Hortons. Then later, he was caught on another CCTV footage at a local Walmart. Then later that evening at roughly 1 a.m., he was last seen by his aunt, where she said he walked off the back deck and was heading towards Lewis Drive. She later said in a Facebook post, quote, "I saw him at 1 a.m. on my uncle's porch. We talked for a bit. He woke me up. He said all these weird things. I could tell he was under the influence. He also mentioned that he had been fighting with a friend at a river. She said that she did not believe him and she thought that this was just the ramblings of somebody incoherent. She stated that she later regretted this and wished she would have went to check out what was going on. Later that evening, Daniel's vehicle was found on the side of the road, still on, the lights on, the door open, his cell phone was on the seat. It looked like he had just gotten out for a minute, but never returned. The next day, another family found his vehicle and reported it to the RCMP. They came out and impounded it. This is a picture of Daniel's actual vehicle. Despite these oddities and Squamish being a town where most people are familiar with one another, no one reported Daniel missing. As stated earlier, it wasn't until 6 weeks later that his uncle reported him officially missing. After he was officially reported missing, they did start a pretty good sized search and rescue. The police released several details of the missing persons report. More information came to light about Daniel's background. Apparently, he had suffered a pretty rough childhood. However, he was a father at this point, and he had been working several odd jobs in construction, trying to lead a better life. Many family members reported that prior to his disappearance, his behavior had become very erratic. At one point, one of his family members recounted that he had recently, in prior months, broken his hand. He was supposed to get some kind of surgery, but then all of a sudden, he just called the family member and said, "Oh, never mind, I'm not going to have the surgery." Many of these conversations had been going back and forth on social media. Between his family members and Daniel would often tell a family member a story, but then recount the story in a completely different way to another family member or that same family member. Daniel himself had posted on social media that he believed he had suffered some kind of psychosis due to his usage and other stressors in his life. What seemingly connects Daniel's disappearance with that of Marshall were various conversations via social media. Daniel at the time was close to a certain relative. This relative had posted several things. He believed that some of the items found at the scene of Marshall Iwasa's truck belonged to Daniel Reoch. This family member then went into some detail, also saying that he couldn't go into further detail because he was scared. Those threads were eventually deleted, but some people that were following this case had already taken screenshots of those threads. Family members of Marshall Iwasa reached out to those of Daniel Reoch. Through their discussions, they believed that these cases were in fact connected. This is because of the red cooler that was found at the scene of Marshall Iwasa's burnt-out truck. According to members of the Facebook community and the family members, This cooler allegedly had the name written in permanent marker Cody Lewis. This information became public because an RCMP officer eventually leaked it to someone that he thought could possibly help with the investigation. They were trying to figure out who this Cody Lewis person was. Well, that person then in turn posted it several times online. Daniel Riok not only had a cousin named Cody Lewis, the surname Lewis was very common in Daniel Riok's family, and coincidental or not, he was last seen on Lewis Drive. Because at the time of Daniel Riok's disappearance, he had been, quote, couch surfing between relatives, it's quite possible that this red cooler had come into his possession during this time. Both the RCMP and the Lethbridge police have said that this is just coincidental and has no bearing on the case. Most family members of both Daniel Riok and Marshall Iwasa do not agree with this. They also say that if that's the case, then who is this mysterious Cody Lewis? It is also noteworthy to say that these conversations that occurred on social media and then were screenshotted all happened before the information about the red cooler became public knowledge. It is also noteworthy to say that the red cooler was one of the main objects that the police had initially said had been moved from the original time that the hikers had found the scene and 2 days later when the RCMP arrived to begin their official investigation. One of the last leads that the RCMP got was from an eyewitness that supposedly saw both Daniel Riok and Marshall Iwasa along with a third party back in November of 2019 before they went missing at this bar in Squamish called That Irish Place, pictured here. The witness claims that he was inside the bar and he saw both Daniel and Marshall inside this truck in this parking lot pictured here. The witness had gone outside to smoke a cigarette when Daniel approached him. They talked a little bit. The witness said that both Daniel and Marshall had this look of terror in their eyes. The witness asked Daniel what he was doing there, and according to this witness, Daniel said, "I think that guy back there is going to kill us." The witness, while recounting this to a friend online, said that he brushed this off as just drunken talk, then later recalled once he learned of the disappearances that he was 100% sure that this was them. He said that he wished he would have asked more. He said that he would have offered them some money. I don't know, I find this a little bit hard to believe because if someone were to say that to you, why wouldn't you say, wait, what are you talking about? Do you need help? Explore it further. But who knows, this could be an accurate statement. I wanted to mention it because it was one of the last leads that the authorities received. Both Marshall Iwasa and Daniel Riok remain missing to this day. One of the most popular theories online is that they were involved in some kind of illegal trade, some stating that storage units are often used for this kind of illegal activity. Also, Marshall Iwasa's truck had recently been paid off and none of the family members can account for where he gotten that money from. Most people believe that the cases are connected. I personally believe that foul play was involved in both cases. I think it's ridiculous to say that Marshall Iwasa set his truck on fire, removed the steering column, and did everything that the police found. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I think it's possible that both these guys were working for the authorities as confidential informants, and that's why there's been so much ambiguity in what the police statements have said, and they're resilient to actually move forward with the investigations. Unfortunately, because that private citizen did go out and removed the vehicle of Marshall Iwasa just this year, going back and doing further forensic analysis is impossible because the vehicle was eventually taken to a junkyard, which of course devastated the family and everyone looking into this case. Who knows, there may still be some evidence in the woods or near the creek somewhere that's still waiting to be found. We've seen this in cases in the past. I just hope and pray that the families of both these young men get answers and are able to get their beloved family members home. I want to dedicate this video to Marshall Iwasa and Daniel Riok, their family, their friends, all their loved ones. I hope and pray one day soon both your loved ones are found and you'll get the answers that you so lovingly deserve. Thank you all for watching. As always, thank you for all your support, your comments, your feedback. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. Hopefully I will see you all in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. I would definitely like to hear your thoughts on this case if you know about this case or have been following it. I think a lot of the information that we have gotten is from people sharing the case, talking about their thoughts and ideas on social media. I know the families of both these young men are still desperate for answers to know what happened to their loved ones. If you have any information regarding either of these cases, I'll have information in the description on authorities you can contact. You can also remain anonymous if you like. I want to say thank you again for all your support, all my subscribers, everyone who's donated. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel a lot and future search and rescue investigations. All my information is in the description. Thanks again. See you next time.